Chancellor Donovan, thank you very much for being with us. I think that it's probably fair to say that this is a transitional and maybe a pivotal time for the state college system. You're about to leave. There's going to be a new chair of the Board of Trustees, and some of the campus enrollments are down, and the legislature continues not to increase the amount of funding for the state college system. So what are you or what is your successor going to do about all that?
There are a lot of things that are challenging, particularly public institutions. We're in New England, we are about a little more than halfway through an 8-year decline in the number of high school graduates. That's purely a birth rate factor. And we've actually weathered that relatively well. Since that began in 2008, our enrollments are up about 8%, even though they're down overall a couple of percentage points in the past year. And so, in some regards, it's easy to kind of overreact to this, and I don't want to downplay that these are challenges for our institutions and others, but these are healthy institutions that do a good job of enrolling. About 2/3 of the college-going students who stay in the state of Vermont are at these 5 colleges.
Let's go into that a little more deeply. Give me numbers. How many students graduate from Vermont high schools every year, roughly?
We in the last year we graduated about 7,000. We graduated about 7,000 high school seniors graduated last year, each of the last 3 years. Okay.
And how many of them go to college at
About
all?
60% go to college at all, and
That's
that's low. And we should come back and talk about that. But about 60% go on to college. Half of those leave the state to go to college.
Right.
And of those who remain in the state, about 65% are at the state colleges, about 20% are at the university, and the remaining 10% are at the 16 private or independent colleges in Vermont. And so there's a certain number of that half that leave the state that are leaving it because we as a state have chosen, I don't think intentionally, but we've chosen to make the price of our higher education expensive because we don't fund it in the way that other states do. And so, and we have portability of VSAC grants. So we help students leave the state in some regards.
Because VSAC will help you anywhere.
Anywhere.
Right.
And so, there's people who think that's good public policy and some who think it's bad public policy. But it's one more factor that creates a little bit more drain outside of the state. Because half of our students leaving the state that's very high as well. We're among the highest in the country in exporting high school seniors to go to college.
Now, you say, let's go back to we have chosen to make it expensive, which is another way of saying we have chosen not to fund it. The state now pays for what percentage of the cost?
18% of our revenue stream comes from the state, and 72% comes from tuition. That puts us by every measure, John, whether it's dollars per student, dollars per $1,000 of personal income, percentage of the state budget, percentage of state gross domestic product, any measure, we're 49th or 50th in the country in that regard. And that includes not only UVM and the VSE, but that includes the money appropriated to VSAC. You take all of that together, by every measure, we're dead last in the country.
And you've made an effort to increase it.
Again, I've been in the system for 38 years, and I've been
trying
making an effort to increase it. We've seen a steady decline in that percentage. There's a graphic we show in the legislature every year that they say, "Oh yeah, here it comes again." That looks like an ice tong. That it was 50-50 in 1985, and it's now 72-18 now. It's been a steady decline, partly because the size of the state colleges has well more than doubled since 1985. So there's a growth factor that's in that.
Oh, so the amount of money that goes to the colleges has not gone down.
Well, it's not gone down, but it's not kept up either with inflation, nor has it kept up with growth in enrollment.
So it's per student, it's gone way down in percentage terms.
We're one of the few states that fund higher education with no formula. There's nothing that relates to enrollment. There's nothing that relates to any metrics. It's a flat amount increased by whatever the legislature decides to increase it by each year. And then a year ago, Governor Shumlin, to his credit, asked for, and the legislature agreed to, a 3% increase. Right. But because everyone's concerned about the cost of college, we were asked to put that 3% entirely into helping Vermont students with aid.
This was in 2012.
This was just a year ago, 2013, for the year that's just finished.
Right,
Okay? So that 3% didn't really benefit the colleges at all.
It went to the students.
It went to the students to help them pay for college.
Right.
And so that amounted to, in the case of the state colleges, about $90 per student. Some of this is accident of history, and that's why I refer to it as probably unintentional public policy. In the early 70s, there was a public policy concept that I think was generally agreed on, that we would be a high tuition, high aid state. In other words, you would let the cost of the education be close to what it really is, and then you would provide support for individual students who had need so that they had the same opportunities that other students did. And that's where the portability in state and out of state came from. But I have to say, we as a state haven't even maintained the high aid portion of that equation.
Why am I not surprised?
So we're 48th in the country right now, John, and here's how far in 48th we are. We could increase the appropriation to higher education, again, UVM, the state colleges, and VSAC, by 50%. Take it from roughly $80 million to $120 million. And it would move us from 49th to 47th.
Okay, what do you say to the legislator who says, okay, wise guy, where's the money going to come from? What are we going to cut, or how much are we going to raise in taxes?
Well, two answers to that, John. One is we've been making those choices all along. Right. Okay, we're one of the states in the country, and I think there are 5 of them now that have a bigger appropriation for corrections than we do for higher education. We spend the most of any state in the country on K-12 education per student. Right. The Ed Fund right now for K-12 education is $1.6 billion, something like that. Okay. Our appropriation to higher education is $80 million. Now, granted, there's orders of magnitude difference, but we make this huge investment in the middle and not much investment before kindergarten, right, and not much investment after high school, at a time when employers in the state and across the country are saying we can't get the educated workforce that we need, because as we see a generational sea change in the workforce. As we have more and more retirees from baby boomers, we have employers in this state who are very concerned about that. So let me put it in context. So between what we spend on higher education and pre-K education and K-12, let's call it $1.6 billion a year, okay? There were 6,500 live births in Vermont last year. If we, in equal amounts, not suggesting that's what you would do, but if you said, okay, on average, we're going to invest in a child when they're born in this state for the first 20 years of their development and education, $1.6 billion divided by 6,500 live births, divided by 20 years, is $12,000 a year. We're spending enough money. But I don't think that we have been at all deliberate about how do we make that investment in the development of our future workforce and our future citizenry.
Well, let me ask you a little bit about some criticism I've heard too much resource going into administration, not enough into classroom teaching, too many teachers, part-time faculty as opposed to full-time, part-time adjunct as opposed to full-time faculty.
Well, let's separate those two things. On the first of those, our ratio of both people and payroll, if you will, is about 50% people who are in the classroom and 50% people who are not in the classroom. Now, sometimes that word administrator gets interpreted as high-level administration, when in fact it will be virtually everybody who's not in the classroom. And so who is that? Well, that's people who do student advising. It's people who are doing our library services. It's people who are providing technology to our students and to our faculty. It's the people who are keeping student records. It's the people who are keeping the books for the institution. And none of these institutions, quite frankly, have an overabundance of what we might call senior leadership.
Now, part-time adjunct as opposed to full-time faculty.
This is true across the country, and every college I know is trying to seek the balance that they need there. We have an interesting aspect of this. We have a statewide community college, as you know,
Right,
which is all community-based part-time faculty. And it's interesting to me. I sit on the accreditation commission for New England, and it's interesting to me how people are starting to say, you know, that's really an interesting thing, because then those folks only focus on teaching, and everything else faculty do, we have somebody else that does at that college. The mix at these colleges, their numbers of full-time faculty have been relatively stable, I'm going to say, for the last decade, in terms of the numbers of full-time faculty. Part-time faculty help you fill out, if you will, small faculties. Let me give you an example. If you have a program in, let's say business, because there's business programs at virtually every college. It's a popular major. And you say, okay, we're going to have 5 full-time faculty in the business department. 5 full-time faculty aren't going to give you the content coverage that you really want. And so do you add a 6th, or do you say, let's get some variety? And I think from an educational standpoint, I think full-time faculty are enormously important in our institutions. But I think we can round out the students' exposure to different perspectives and different content expertise by taking advantage of those resources that are in the community.